It's a glimpse of hope and humanity in the middle of the darkness of war.
The pause in the fighting between Israel and Hamas is extended for 2 more days, but still big questions over what can bring the conflict to a complete end. Hello, I'm Arlen Naidoo, and this is The Heat. Israel and Hamas have agreed to extend by 2 days the temporary truce originally set to expire on Monday. This will allow for more hostages and more Palestinian prisoners to be released. The Associated Press correspondent Sam Mednick joins us. She has more from Jerusalem.
Hamas and Israel have agreed to extend the ceasefire by 2 more days. This would extend the original 4 days. What this would look like would be 2 more days with no fighting and 20 more hostages released, 10 hostages per day of ceasefire. Qatar announced this on Monday. Now, on Monday was the final batch of the original agreement, where 11 hostages were released into Israel. They are receiving medical attention, according to Israel's military. The majority of those released on Monday were children. Also on Monday, 33 Palestinian prisoners are set to be released as well. But there are still an estimated 175 hostages believed to be in Gaza. It's unclear when they are going to get out. If they were to do a ceasefire with batches of people being released, it could take up to about 2.5 weeks. It's not even sure if that is an option that's on the table. Now, conflict analysts I have spoken to have said that Hamas is likely agreeing to this extension because it gains them favor with the Palestinians in Gaza, who are happy about this truce and no fighting. It also allows more aid to get into Gaza, which has been greatly needed. It also allows Hamas strategic time to regroup ahead of the next offensive. Israel has made it very clear that no matter how long the ceasefire goes, it is not finished with this war. This is just a pause, and it is going to continue the fighting in order to accomplish its goals, in order to eradicate Hamas and make sure that all of the hostages are released. The Palestinians have been using this 4-day pause to check on their houses, much of which has been reduced to rubble because of weeks of airstrikes. They've been looking for loved ones, many people that they haven't known if they're alive or dead, and are trapped underneath the rubble. And they've also been trying to get the humanitarian assistance that has been coming in. Food, water, cooking oil, fuel, which hasn't really come into Gaza at all since the beginning of the war. Sam Mednick with the Associated Press for CGTN in Jerusalem.
Okay, let's get to our panel. From Norman in Oklahoma, Joshua Landis is director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Dan Arbell is a scholar in residence at American University. He joins us from Rockville in Maryland. Khalil Jahshan is executive director of the Arab Center here in Washington, D.C., and also here in Washington. Kenneth Katzman is a senior fellow at the Soufan Center. Welcome to all of you. Khalil, let me start with you. So as we just heard, the pause has been extended for 2 more days. Many Palestinians who were held in Israeli prisons have now returned home to their homes in the West Bank, to Gaza as well. Israeli hostages that were held by Hamas in Gaza have been released. They've been back to their homes as well, among them women and children. One of the children was as young as 4 years old. But looking at the pictures that are coming out of northern Gaza, central Gaza right now, we can see that complete and total devastation of that territory. And depending on which source you're getting the numbers from, there are between 15 and 20,000 Palestinians who have been killed, the majority of them women and children. So looking at this, more than 7 weeks, almost 8 weeks after the bombing of Gaza started, where do you see this? What is your assessment?
Unfortunately, I mean, it has been 7 weeks plus of hell, in the sense that with the events of October 7, the casualties that happened on that day, plus the additional casualties that you just referred to, indicate that there is no end in sight as far as the fighting is concerned. The Israelis have been very clear that this little pause in sanity is only a pause. It's only temporary. And regardless of this extension or even potentially future extensions, which I wouldn't be surprised if they add 1 or 2 more down the road, But eventually, the parties are going to return to fighting. And when you look at the damage done here in terms of, as you just indicated, 15 to about 20,000 dead on the Palestinian side, in addition to what we have seen, 1,200 claimed by the Israelis, including I would say a good chunk of the civilians included in that, about 851 to be precise, civilians killed on October 7th, plus 36,000 injuries on the Palestinian side, 15,000 injuries on the Israeli side, 1.7 million displaced on the Palestinian side. I mean, these numbers are mind-boggling for a small area twice the size of DC. So it is very, very hard to even find some sort of peace in the pause that we are witnessing today. From a human perspective, yes, it's definitely positive that some lives have been saved the past 4 years, and hopefully more will be saved over the next 2 years. But it is so savage and so brutal to even think of that. In a day or two, we're going to go back to the same carnage.
Dan Arbell, as I said, many Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas. They have been reunited with their families, many of them women and children as well. Israel, as Khalil Jahshan just pointed out to us, says that it will resume bombing once this truce or the stop in the fighting will resume. But I'm wondering, in Israel itself, how much pressure is there on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well as the cabinet to get more hostages released? We know that there is public pressure in Israel. There have been huge demonstrations in Israeli towns and cities as well. So what is your reading of how long this could take?
Yeah, so the number that has been released so far is around 50, and that leaves another 170 more hostages still held by Hamas, still, again, women, children, and elderly. And I think that, there will be, a few dozen more in the coming days. But then at a certain point, I think, as you've all mentioned, there will be a return to fighting. While there is pressure on the Netanyahu government to continue with the temporary ceasefire to allow the release of more hostages, at a certain point, though, I think there will be the nature of the game will change, because now we're talking about women and children held by Hamas, and there's no question as to their release. Then we'll get to the categories of soldiers and other elderly men and so on and so forth. And I think then Hamas is going to ask for a much higher price, and there will be a bigger debate within Israel whether to agree to that price. There is consensus, though, in Israel that while Israel seeks the release of hostages, I think the fighting must continue. There's a broad consensus that the war has not achieved all of its objectives, and therefore there will be very broad support for the government to resume the fighting once this next sequence of exchanges in the next day or two ends. So I do believe that we'll see more fighting within several days.
Dan, I want to get to the goals, Israel's objectives, as you point out, in a moment. But there are also some questions being raised after a report from the United States radio network NPR that Israel continues to arrest hundreds of Palestinians so that it gives Israel more negotiating room in which to exchange 4 hostages. What do you know about that?
I haven't seen those reports confirmed. I think that there's no issue here of Israel has many Palestinian prisoners that have been sitting in security prisoners that have been in jail for a long time, So I don't think that there's an issue of Palestinians that need to be that are sitting in jail and that can be I don't think there's an issue with that, and I don't see any substantiated evidence that Israel is now conducting, new waves of arrests so it can serve as collateral or as exchange for future Israeli hostages. I think that at a certain point, it will come to a point where Hamas's demands will increase, and then it will be a major test for Israel as to what to do. Just gathering people from the street does not seem to me like sound Israeli policy. I don't think it's true reporting.
Joshua Landis, Dan just raised the issue of Israel's objectives, its goals in the bombing of Gaza. Israel says the bombing will continue until it achieves its goal, which is the destruction of Hamas, both politically and militarily. But if we look at the number of casualties so far in Gaza, the majority have been civilians, mainly women and children. So where does that put us? Are we going to see a lot more violence as Israel pursues these goals?
Well, the question is, can Israel actually achieve any of its goals, which don't seem achievable? To destroy Hamas, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. Even if they can kill the top leaders, there's going to be many Hamas remaining, and they are going to try to reconstitute themselves. But even if they were destroyed, there would be many Islamist groups that are going to set up. And this is, I think, very comparable to Israel's effort to destroy the PLO when it went into Lebanon and tried to kill Arafat and his top lieutenants. What it produced was Hezbollah, and a PLO came right back and became a power. But then Hamas came out also. So trying to destroy the political parties that lead the Palestinians in Gaza is going to be very difficult, and especially if they have to move down to the south, where there are 2 million people trying to take refuge. It will be an impossible task without killing tens of thousands of more civilians. And that's going to begin to look very bad for the United States, which is, of course, supplying most of the weaponry that is killing these people. And Biden has been, protecting Israel in the UN and in the world community and amongst popular opinion. And I think that he's going to tire of doing that. And there's going to be a lot of criticism within the White House for this stand, because where does it end up? And what is the solution? Biden has said there has to be a two-state solution, but it seems quite impossible to have a two-state solution today in Israel when 700,000 Israelis have moved into the territory that Palestinians want to have a state in. And how does America's failed at this at every turn in the past? Today it's a much harder lift to get a two-state solution.
Ken Katzman, great to see you. It has been a long time. I just want to pick up on the point that Joshua made right now on President Biden. What are his options right now?
Thanks, Anna, and good to be back. No longer with the government. Good to be back. Well, I think there's really no choice but to complete the defeat of Hamas. Actually, they have not put up as much resistance as a lot of people expected. There were all sorts of assessments before Israel went in on the ground that there were going to be ambushes right and left, IEDs, hundreds, thousands of IDF killed. It hasn't happened. Not to say it won't happen, but anyway, we pointed out the difficulty of crushing Hamas. You can't defeat an idea, you can't defeat an ideology. That's true. But remember, this is not like Afghanistan, where the Taliban were able to retreat into Pakistan and have safe haven. They can't retreat into Gaza, into the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt is not going to allow that. They can't retreat into Israel. So they're sort of, it's a very small place. And, I think Hamas's days are pretty much numbered now. The PLO was mentioned. The PLO eventually did make a different decision. Then instead of continuing on a terrorist pathway, they were going to negotiate. And they did get concessions, and there was a negotiating pathway. Now, unfortunately, it was interrupted a lot of blame to go around for that. There was a pathway during President Clinton's term, and then it got interrupted, and it's been disrupted ever since. But I think the Palestinians in Gaza want to make a different decision and maybe try a more negotiating diplomatic pathway than the pathway they've been taking since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007.
Right, can you say Hamas will be destroyed, but isn't it in the nature of this type of conflict, asymmetric war, that you never know when your enemy has been defeated or whether they have lost?
Well, there could be violence for a long time, but again, they don't have anywhere to retreat to. It's a small area. They don't have anywhere to have safe haven. This is not the Viet Cong here. That can retreat into Cambodia or Laos. It's a very small place. The IDF is very powerful. And I'm not as convinced that Hamas has much of a future as maybe some of the other panelists.
Khalil, I just want to go a little bit into why Hamas carried out the attack on Israel on October 7th. What were its strategic goals? There was a piece in Foreign Policy magazine which makes an attempt to explain that Hamas attack on October, which left 1,200 Israelis dead. The piece makes the point that Hamas had to choose between, and I'm quoting from the piece here, being slowly strangulated and a decisive blow to destroy the assumption that it was a spent force. You have commented on that, you've tweeted about that, so elaborate on that for us.
I agree with that analysis in that specific piece that you referred to, because you have to remember that what happened on basically October 7 did not start on October 7. History did not start on October 7. Hamas was already in a predicament that stretched for 17 years of Israeli siege. Before that, 56 years of Israeli occupation. Before that, 75 years since the Nakba, where the majority of course, of the population of Gaza are the victims of the Nakba in 1948. They all came from different Israeli or Palestinian at the time towns and cities, particularly on the border, current border with Gaza. So to me, what took place on October 7 was essentially a political move, basically saying enough is enough. You are not going to resolve the Palestine problem as you are threatening, and this is addressed both to not just Israel and the United States, but also to Arab partners in an emerging, not necessarily peace process, but a normalization process that is presenting a future for the region without Palestine. So that was essentially the political statement that many analysts who are beginning to unpeel, if you will, different layers of complexities in this conflict are discovering. So essentially it was an existential scream, if you will, or cry by Hamas to survive. Here we are, and we want to be part of the solution.
There is also an assumption, Khalil, and concern that Arab states in the region were opening diplomatic links with Israel at the expense of the Palestinians, that the Palestinians were being abandoned while Israel was getting some kind of regional legitimacy. I mean, are these concerns valid? Is that still going to happen, the so-called Abraham Accords?
They're still valid, although I would say less valid today than they were, let's say, 52 days ago. I think in that respect, one would have to admit objectively that probably Hamas did achieve its objective, that its message went through loud and clear, because they knew that there is a huge gap between public opinion in the Arab world and public policy in these countries, particularly those that have normalized with Israel, where you have 70, 80, according to Arab Opinion Index, which we conduct at Arab Center, and we're right now in the middle of one. The last one we did polled 14 Arab countries, 33,000 Arab citizens, raising this particular question. That was definitely before, of course, October 7th.
Right.
And the discrepancy was huge. And I believe, I would guess that the new results that we will be getting in 2 weeks will also show an even much larger discrepancy or gap between public opinion and public policy in the Arab world, which again, I think in the minds of Hamas might justify what they did.
Joshua Landis, that same piece in Foreign Policy magazine, which was written by Tarek Bassani, who is of the Palestinian Policy Network, he says that through the Hamas attack and Israel response, and now I'm quoting him, he says, the illusion that the Palestinian question can be swept aside while Israeli apartheid persists has been shattered, unquote. Do you agree with that?
You know, it's too early to say. I think that's clearly the objectives of this Hamas attack is the Palestinians say you cannot turn the page on the Palestinian issue. We want sovereignty. We want justice. But can they be destroyed? That's still an ongoing question. Two of the most powerful militaries in the in the Western world are working hand in glove to see if they can destroy Hamas. The Palestinian voice is not going to go away, but we've seen the Arab states begin to all turn the page on the Palestinians, which provoked this, as Mr. Jahshan said, and it's unclear if the Palestinians can be suppressed, and for how much longer. That's the big question. Of course, yes, there's not a good answer to it. Many Arabs have said that we will eventually get our way, and that this Israel is living in the midst of an Arab world. But if we look across the Arab world today, Iraq has been largely shattered as a country. Syria has never been poorer and more broken. Lebanon has just gone through bankruptcy and is in terrible condition.
Yep.
Egypt is always on the verge of bankruptcy. The Saudis and the Gulf Arabs want to make a deal with Israel. So even though there's Iran, I guess, in the distance, but Iran has suffered terribly under sanctions. America has it in a very tight grip. It's unclear whether this is going to really make the difference that Palestinians hope that would push it towards either a two-state solution or coming up with some radical break from the status quo.
Dan Arbell, as we've heard more than once, we just heard it from Joshua there, two-state solution. If that is to take place, would it in some way mean that Israel would have to make concessions on the settlers in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem? They would have to be withdrawn, that they would have to concede Palestinian demands on the question of the return of refugees? I mean, how realistic is that to talk about a two-state solution right now?
So I think that we're putting the carriage in front of the horses. And we're not there yet. Certainly not there yet. There's a long way to go. Certainly, when the dust settles and when the war is over, then the international community, Israel, the Arab world will be looking at different options as to how to continue, how to monitor the situation in Gaza, who controls Gaza, which forces are there. I agree that to destroy an idea, destroy Hamas is not an easy task.
Yeah.
I just think that it will be to remove Hamas from the equation, meaning that Hamas will have not take part in any of the power sharing or controlling of the Gaza Strip. And that'll be difficult. I agree, but then that may pave the way to a situation in which the control over Gaza would be transferred to the Palestinian Authority, which would control both Gaza and the West Bank, and eventually would lead to a more stable period in which PA has firm control with the backing of the international community, the backing of the Arab world, and perhaps there will be an Israeli leadership that will be willing to entertain a discussion of two states or the two-state solution.
Right.
Right now, I think that we're very much, it's a very premature, and that may happen, but very much down the road, not.
Ken Katzman, the Washington Post carried a piece in which it says that there are now divisions emerging in the Biden administration inside the White House on how he is handling the crisis in Gaza right now. In fact, there are staffers who have had talks with senior members of the administration, and they're calling for aid to be withheld from Israel. That's military aid as well as financial aid. We are now also seeing that there are some Congress people who are calling for a ceasefire, and many of them, I should point out, are Jewish Congress people, the latest of whom was Jen Schakowsky, who's the Illinois representative. How significant is this? Have you seen these kinds of divisions before, especially among Democrats?
Well, I think it is a new feature. There have not been, I don't think, these open divisions on the Democratic side before. You do have, a growing progressive movement that perhaps is trying to push President Biden to press Israel for a ceasefire. But it's hard to really judge how significant or how big this is. I think the great bulk of the administration is still very much on course with Biden's approach. I think there is a view that if Hamas is left, either in power or allowed to have some military infrastructure retained as a result of a ceasefire, that this is going to happen again. We're just going to have these type of episodes again and again and again. And even though the civilian casualties are lamentable and certainly terrible, it's a price that perhaps is paid to not have this keep going as it is, and have Hamas out of the equation. And then, as Dan was saying, build back a diplomatic solution, get back to where we were, 15 years ago with a roadmap to, a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. Get back to negotiations. I think that's where Mr. Biden wants to go with this roadmap.
Khalil, I've only got about 30 seconds left. You get the last word here. And I'm wondering, from what we've been hearing on the program so far, is it possible to eliminate Hamas from any future political dispensation for the Palestinians?
I doubt it, because frankly, it's not just an armed movement per se. That would have been possible, considering the super, if you will, discrepancy militarily between what Israel has to offer and what Hamas has to offer militarily. But that's not the issue. The issue here is it's a political idea, and I would say it cannot disappear. Yes, it might have difficulty, as Dan said, to move somewhere else. Yeah. And others have referred to the fact that it's stuck there, but it could move to the West Bank and take over the West Bank, as a matter of fact.
All right, we are going to have to leave it there. Time has caught up with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks to everyone for being on the show. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.